As a teacher leader, you may be asked to do work in the area of assessments and data. This work falls under Domain 5 in the Teacher Leader Model Standards. In this presentation, I'll discuss 3 elements of this domain, share some ideas, and recommend resources for strengthening your confidence in leading in this area. I like to think of the work we do with assessments and data as being part of what launches change in our organizations. These changes in instructional practices or in organizational structures are for the benefit of our students. These practices and structures are our space shuttle, and our students are the astronauts. As educators and leaders, we should be using our assessments and data to promote ideas and practices that propel our students into their futures. And what propels the space shuttle? 2 solid rocket boosters. Our rocket boosters for institutional change are fueled, at least in part, by solid assessment practices by ourselves and by our colleagues. As leaders, we're asked to support our colleagues in their use of assessments and the data generated from those assessments. To do that, as teacher leaders, we also need skills in creating a climate of trust and critical reflection, so we can engage our colleagues in challenging conversations that lead to solutions to issues that we identified from our data. And this brings us back to the space shuttle. It's important to me, when working with data, to always remember that the data is a means to an end. It's evidence, it's information, it's part of what's inside the rocket boosters, and it's fueling the change in our schools and in our instructional practice for our space shuttle, for our students. In Domain 5, we work with our colleagues to use assessment and data findings to promote changes to improve student learning. It's about challenging the process. And a good place to start is perhaps spending some time looking at what other schools have done with data successfully. In a 2015 volume of the Educational Leadership Journal, there were 2 articles that I found inspiring, and I'd like to share one story with you. An article entitled "Towards System-Wide Change" described how an elementary school in Hawaii used data for change. This school gathered a lot of data: demographic data, perceptual data, which came from surveys, student learning data from assessments, and school processes data, which included, among other things, instructional practices. The principal then led a session with the teachers. They looked at all this information in an organized, well-planned workshop, and they determined actions and changes for their school, including targeted specific professional learning and a new RTI system. They decided to revisit their mission and vision and align their teaching strategies to each other. They developed a plan and implemented it, even making changes to the leadership structures to facilitate their plan. It's motivating and important for us as teacher leaders to read case studies about successful data work that is focused on students. I came away with a lot of ideas. I love this entire volume of educational leadership, and I'll also recommend the PLC article as another exemplar. This article looked at teacher-driven assessment analysis, specifically how a PLC might begin to analyze a common assessment by posing questions about the results to each other. I think of this article often. When I read it, it seemed like such an ideal to have that much cooperation and trust. It reminds me that effectively analyzing data for the benefit of our students, that even starting the process to challenge the process, is sometimes asking our colleagues to take a big step. So it's essential for me, in working with my colleagues in assessments and data, to have a framework, a lens. Otherwise, there's just too much data and too many options. For me, that lens, that vision that focuses my work, is the issue of equity. I was so excited when I found this book by Ruth Johnson. The subtitle is "How to Measure Equity in Our Schools." After reading this, I found that the conversations I had with my colleagues and my administrators around assessments and data gained more depth. Knowing that I was looking at improving assessment practice, looking at data for the purpose of promoting equity, changed the way I spoke and thought about data, and made me remember and articulate that this work had much more value than changing the predominant color of pie charts on the school's data dashboard. That this work is about our students, eliminating disparate outcomes, and effectively measuring growth. And it's a lot easier to collaborate with your colleagues on assessments and data when you're talking about something much bigger than just assessments and data. To drive these instructional and organizational changes, to get this space shuttle into orbit, we need some fuel in the rocket boosters. And while we are looking to build capacity in our colleagues, the teacher leader model standards specifically mention that teacher leaders should have solid assessment practices themselves. You're probably already familiar with Understanding by Design, and I mention it here not as the only or the best textbook, but to advocate for teacher leaders having a clear, defined practice. I'm always trying to have my own practice be a model, and reconnecting to a reference text has helped me clarify my own work. This helps me be effective as both an instructional coach and a data coach. And maybe you ascribe to Marzano or Brookhart or one of our field's other assessment gurus. I think the important part in modeling the way in this instance is that we as teacher leaders are articulate and clear about our practice so that we're able to share what it is that we're modeling. And if you need a quick refresher, reread Chapter 7, Thinking Like an Assessor, and revisit terms like backwards design, authentic performance, and the GRASPS acronym. If you're in a data role at your school, you're likely going to be asked to lead a data meeting or professional development at some point. Having an opportunity to enable others is that chance to launch change, or at least get that space shuttle moving toward the launch pad. But in educational institutions, few people receive training in being facilitators of adult learning, so to grow in this area, we teacher leaders usually have to train ourselves. And strong facilitation skills are a must, especially when teacher leaders are presenting about data or assessments. In Driven by Data, the author lists some common failures of facilitators, such as struggling to structure sharing, failing to plan transitions, and teaching by talking, reminding me that teachers are pretty bad at teaching teachers. I like this book, though, because he also presents a core idea to use in leading professional development. Start by defining the end goal and then design activities that can allow people to get there mostly on their own. He calls this living the learning. I recommend this chapter for anyone who leads trainings for professionals. As you and your colleagues look at assessment results and analyze data, you're probably going to end up in some challenging conversations. I've been a participant in group work about data assessment results in which the conversations did not have enough structure or pre-planning. So then when the dialogue got rough, the whole process kind of fell apart. I found some really great ideas in a book that was recently recommended to me. In Chapter 3, the authors spell out the collaborative learning cycle. This breaks down the inquiry process into 3 parts and provides a structure to use in data conversations. Having this structure and planning in your work with other teachers goes a long way toward building trust and confidence, and it positions us to have problem-solving conversations which can ultimately lead to the positive changes that we want for our students. So remember, as you do this work, as you work through Domain 5, promoting the use of assessments and data for school and district improvement, that everything you are doing, with your colleagues, your own practice, and with your administrators, is in support of your students. That beyond that spreadsheet of test scores, beyond the pie charts, and behind the 5x5 reports, is your vision of what makes a difference for kids. Stick to that. Best of luck.